hospital corridor hummed with a sterile quiet, broken only by the occasional squeak of rubber soles against polished floors. Fluorescent lights buzzed faintly overhead, washing everything in a cold, pale glow. The sharp smell of antiseptic clung to the air, a reminder that this was no ordinary waiting space but the threshold of life and death. Nurses moved swiftly past, pushing carts of gleaming instruments, while the hum of machines echoed faintly behind closed doors. She sat in her gown, hands folded in her lap, heart pounding with a mixture of fear and fierce determination. Today, she would give a part of herself so her son could keep living. Her mind drifted back. His little boy laugh that once filled their house. His stubborn energy that even illness could not silence. The years of watching him grow weaker, yet never surrender. She closed her eyes and whispered, almost like a prayer, "I'll give him my life again." Beside her, the family waited in heavy silence. Her husband sat stiffly, jaw tight, his support evident but strained. His eyes betrayed a storm he wouldn't voice. Their grandson, 17 and restless, paced the linoleum, sneakers tapping nervously with each turn. His face was pale, his hands clenched and unclenched as though holding back something more than nerves. The daughter-in-law sat apart, eyes fixed on the floor, shoulders tense, her avoidance louder than words. Old cracks in the family, arguments over inheritance, silent grudges never healed, seemed to hover in the room, unspoken but alive. In the midst of this quiet tension, the boy muttered under his breath, barely audible yet heavy with weight. Truth before surgery. No one turned, no one asked, and the words drifted into the sterile air, dismissed as nerves. But the silence that followed carried a shadow none of them recognized yet. He had not always been a patient in a hospital bed, frail and waiting for someone else's body to carry him forward. There was a time when her son had walked tall, full of promise, with a stable job and a reputation for being the dependable one. He had been a devoted father, the kind who coached Little League, read bedtime stories, and laughed loudest at family dinners. Then the illness arrived like a storm no one saw coming. First came fatigue, then unexplained pain, then endless tests until the diagnosis landed with crushing finality. The strong man who once carried everyone else began to collapse under the weight of failing kidneys. Bills piled up, savings drained, and stability dissolved like sand slipping through desperate hands. Relatives came forward at first with gestures of help, but soon the cracks began to show. Arguments about money, disagreements about responsibilities, whispered judgments in hallways. Each hospital stay chipped away at the image of invincibility, leaving behind not only a broken body but a family straining at the seams. The deeper wounds weren't carved by disease alone. His wife, her daughter-in-law, often accused the mother of loving him too much, of giving him privileges his siblings never had. The words stung because they carried both truth and venom. The grandson, too old to ignore but too young to intervene, overheard far more than anyone realized. He lay awake at night while voices carried through thin walls, whispers about a real father, about hidden sacrifices, about secrets never meant for daylight. It wasn't just about illness anymore. It was about identity, about truths buried under decades of silence. Then came the financial fracture. The grandmother's house deed quietly shifted years ago in a way no one fully explained. That one act, meant to protect or to control, left a wound that never healed. Every decision since then carried suspicion, every kindness questioned. And now, with a surgery looming that demanded absolute trust, those unresolved betrayals lay in the background, ready to ignite. The grandson's silence held them all hostage, and though no one dared to say it aloud, the air in the family was charged with a generational secret waiting to break. The room felt like it had shrunk, its walls pressing closer as the surgical team made their final preparations. A nurse with calm efficiency drew a blue line across her skin, marking the place where steel would meet flesh. She tried to still her trembling hands, clenching them into fists, but the shaking betrayed her anyway. Across from her, her son lay pale and exhausted, his body weakened but his spirit stubborn. He turned his head toward her, his voice no louder than a breath. "Thank you, Mom." The weight of those words filled her chest with equal parts pride and sorrow. The surgeon, masked and focused, glanced at the clock and spoke firmly. "We're minutes away." The countdown had begun. Machines beeped steadily, the air sharp with sterile scents, the rhythm of footsteps growing faster as final checks were made. It was supposed to be a moment of courage, of sacrifice sealed in silence. Instead, it became the moment everything unraveled. Stop. You can't do this. The voice cracked through the room like glass shattering. The grandson stood frozen at the threshold, his face white, his fists balled, his shout carrying through the sterile calm. For a second, no one moved. Then chaos. Alarms rang as nurses rushed to block his path, doctors demanded order, and gasps erupted from the family huddled nearby. His grandmother's heart lurched, torn between fury and fear. The boy's chest heaved as he shook his head violently. Not until everyone's here, he cried. Not until they know. Confusion rippled through the room. The surgeon raised a hand, barking at the team to hold. The moment stretched thin, as if the entire hospital held its breath. And in that fragile pause, seconds before the scalpel touched her skin, the surgery was stopped. The family was rushed into a small consultation room, its beige walls and ticking clock suffocating in the silence that followed. The doctors stood sternly at the door, arms crossed, urgency lacing their voices. We need to know what this is about. Time is critical. Either we proceed now or we lose our window. All eyes turned toward the grandson. He stood against the wall, trembling, his palms pressed to his face as though holding back a storm. When he finally spoke, his voice cracked in a way that split the air. He's not even your real son. The words detonated in the room. Gasps tore through the silence. His father's head snapped up. The daughter-in-law's eyes went wide, and his grandmother's body jolted as if struck. Tears welled instantly, anger bristled on every face, and the son himself shook his head violently, refusing to let the words sink in. What are you talking about? He demanded, voice hoarse with disbelief. The boy's chest rose and fell as though every breath was a battle. I heard it. I heard everything. Grandma's mother told me before she died. She said you weren't her blood. The truth spilled like broken glass across the floor. He explained in fragments, his voice shaking, that during a long-buried family scandal, his grandmother, the mother's late husband's mother, had admitted a secret that had festered for decades. The boy had overheard her hushed confession. The son had been adopted quietly, informally, a desperate cover-up to shield the family name. His biological father wasn't the man everyone believed, but the mother's brother-in-law, her late husband's own brother. Paperwork had been hidden, details erased, the story rewritten before she ever had a chance to know. The revelation cut through her like a knife. Her knees went weak as she realized that every birthday, every scraped knee she had nursed, every sacrifice she had made, she had done it in the dark, unaware of the betrayal stitched into her own family's fabric. The son's eyes filled with tears, his face red with rage. You're lying, he whispered, more to himself than anyone else. But the grandson's sobs told otherwise. The doctors glanced between them, impatient but sympathetic. Biologically or not, one finally said, you're still a viable match. We can still proceed. But the mother's heart was no longer steady. The donation, medically unchanged, had just been torn from its emotional anchor. The truth hadn't stopped her body from being a match, but it had fractured her reality into pieces she wasn't sure could ever be fit back together. The words hung in the air like poison, and the room erupted. The son pushed himself forward, voice raw and shaking, anger spilling out faster than reason could catch it. No, don't you dare say that. His eyes locked on his mother's, desperate, almost pleading. You raised me, you fed me, you taught me, you held me when I was sick. You're my mother, nothing changes that. His denial was fierce, but beneath the fury there was fear, the kind that comes when the ground beneath you starts to crumble. The daughter-in-law, who had been sitting stone-faced, finally spoke, her tone cutting and cold. I knew something was off. I always suspected, the way your family whispered when they thought I wasn't listening. The way papers never quite matched up. I wanted to believe it wasn't true, but deep down, I've been waiting for this moment. Her voice dripped with bitterness, not shock. It was a confession less about truth than about resentment finally given a voice. Across the room, the husband remained silent. His lips were pressed tight, his gaze fixed on the floor. He didn't need to say anything. His silence was loud enough. His face carried a shadow that told her everything. He knew. He had always known. The realization carved through her chest. The man she had trusted with her life had kept this secret locked away, leaving her blind in her own home. The grandson's voice cracked as he stepped forward, tears streaming. "I didn't want to do this here," he said, clutching the folded letters in his shaking hands. "I found them in the attic while cleaning, old, sealed, hidden away in a box with your husband's things. Letters about the adoption, about why they had to keep it quiet. I couldn't let you give your life without knowing." His words came like broken glass, each one cutting him as much as it cut her. "I'm sorry. I had to choose between keeping loyalty to the family lie or telling the truth that could destroy us, and I chose truth." The mother's chest tightened, her breath unsteady as the puzzle pieces locked into place. The quiet glances, the paperwork that never made sense, the way her husband had always deflected questions about that first year. It wasn't the grandmother who had orchestrated the lie. It was him, her late husband, the man she had buried with grief and love. He had carried the scandal, rewritten the story, and left her living inside a life shaped by his deceit. And now, decades later, she was standing in the wreckage of his choice, her heart torn between the love she had lived and the betrayal she had never seen. The hospital became less of a sanctuary and more of a battleground. Within hours, social workers were called into the consultation room, their notepads ready, their expressions tight with concern. The revelation wasn't just a private storm anymore. It carried weight in the eyes of the institution. Lawyers soon entered the picture, voices clipped and clinical, laying out the consequences that sprawled far beyond the surgery. Inheritance rights could be contested. Property transfers from years ago might come under legal fire. Insurance fraud, one of them warned, could be argued if the adoption had been deliberately hidden on medical records. The family sat in stunned silence as the sterile medical crisis became entangled with courts and paperwork. Through it all, the daughter-in-law's voice rose above the noise, sharp and unyielding. "None of this matters right now. He needs the kidney. My husband needs to live." Her eyes flashed with desperation that looked like love, but felt like survival. She didn't care about secrets or bloodlines. She needed her husband alive, and she wasn't afraid to make it clear that his mother's hesitation was, to her, an unforgivable sin. But for the mother, the struggle went deeper than contracts and cold legal terms. Medically, she remained a match. Her body could still save him, yet emotionally, the betrayal burned like fire beneath her skin. She had spent her life believing in a bond of blood that wasn't truly there. Now, every beat of her heart asked a question she couldn't silence. Was love lived enough to outweigh the truth of blood denied? She sought comfort in silent prayer, her lips trembling over words she couldn't finish. If sacrifice was her calling, did the lie nullify its meaning? Or did it prove that love was stronger than genetics? The family fractured before her eyes. On one side stood her grandson and a cousin, voices firm in their conviction that truth mattered most, even if it shattered everything. They believed the surgery could wait until the lies were untangled. On the other stood the daughter-in-law, backed by the medical team who pressed urgency into every sentence. "Every hour we waste, his chances weaken," the doctors warned. "We don't have the luxury of delay." The grandson's eyes pleaded for honesty. The daughter-in-law's eyes demanded action. And there she stood, torn in the center, her soul stretched between love and betrayal, faith and fury, truth and survival. The room's arguments swirled around her, but none louder than the voice inside her own chest whispering, "What is family? Blood or choice?" The chapel was nearly empty, just the soft hum of the heating system, and the faint glow of colored light filtering through stained glass windows. She sat alone in the front pew, shoulders heavy, the sterile smell of the hospital replaced here by the faint scent of old wood and candle wax. In the quiet, memories rose unbidden. She saw herself holding her son for the first time, the weight of him against her chest, the joy that filled her heart. She saw him years later on stage at a school play, his grin flashing toward her in the crowd, his voice wavering but proud. She saw him broken-hearted after his first love ended, when he came home late and silent, and she stayed awake until dawn just to sit beside him. Each memory carved its truth into her soul. He might not share her blood, but he shared her scars, her laughter, her nights of prayer. In the stillness, she whispered the realization aloud. Love isn't about who shares your blood, but who shares your scars. The sound of footsteps drew her from her reflection. Her grandson appeared at the chapel's doorway, hesitant, guilt etched across his face. He slipped into the pew beside her, head bowed. His voice broke as he confessed. "I was afraid I ruined everything. I thought telling the truth would destroy this family." His hands fidgeted, his eyes wet with regret. She placed her hand gently over his, her voice calm, steady. "Truth never destroys," she said softly. "Lies do. They rot us from the inside until we can't breathe anymore. You gave us air again." The weight of decision settled on her chest, but it no longer crushed her. It steadied her. She knew now what she had to do, not because of genetics, not because of a bloodline forged in secrecy, but because of the love she had lived every day since the moment she first called him son. Her resolve hardened in the glow of the stained glass. She would go through with the surgery, not for biology, but for love. The operating room was bright and cold, filled with the steady rhythm of machines and the clipped voices of surgeons preparing for the hours ahead. She lay on the table, the gown thin against her skin, the ceiling lights blurring into halos above her. Electrodes clung to her chest, monitors beeped in careful time, and the anesthesiologist adjusted the mask poised above her face. Her family waited just beyond those heavy double doors, their voices muffled but their division still sharp. Some prayed for survival, others wrestled with truth. She turned her head slightly before her eyes closed, her whisper threading through the sterile air. "I choose him, no matter what blood says." The operation began. Steel met flesh, hands moved with practiced precision, and the room filled with the orchestrated calm of life-saving work. Outside, the hours stretched unbearably. The grandson sat restless, his leg bouncing, while the daughter-in-law paced like a caged bird. The husband sat silently in a corner, his face unreadable, his silence louder than argument. When the surgeon finally emerged, fatigue etched across his face. The words everyone had been waiting for dropped like sunlight breaking storm clouds. The surgery was successful. Relief came in waves, though it didn't erase the fractures still lodged in their hearts. When she opened her eyes, she found her son's hand clasped around hers, his face streaked with tears. "Mom," he whispered, voice ragged, "I don't deserve this, but I'll spend the rest of my life proving I'm yours." She smiled weakly, squeezing his fingers with what strength she had left. Nearby, the grandson lingered in the doorway, shoulders lighter. He didn't boast or defend himself. He simply stood proud in the quiet knowledge that truth, however painful, had not destroyed them. It had saved them. Weeks later, the family gathered for dinner. The table was smaller now, quieter, but it was honest. There were still silences, still wounds healing, but something new sat between them, the possibility of rebuilding. As she passed bread to her grandson, she spoke softly, more to herself than to anyone else. "Truth didn't break us. It stripped us bare. Now we can build again." In the hospital garden, a young sapling took root. She knelt beside her grandson as they pressed soil around its fragile trunk, the earth cool beneath their fingers. It wasn't planted for lineage or bloodline. It was planted as a choice, a symbol of chosen roots, of love that grows not because of what is inherited, but because of what is nurtured. As the leaves rustled in the breeze, she felt peace for the first time in years. The night after the surgery, when the monitors finally slowed into a steady rhythm and the hospital lights dimmed into their late-hour hush, she lay awake, unable to sleep. The anesthesia had worn off, but the weight inside her chest was heavier than any incision or stitched wound. She stared at the ceiling tiles above her, each square blending into the next, and wondered how many lives had been rebuilt in rooms like this, and how many had been broken forever. She thought of her son's face when he opened his eyes, how his hand trembled as it wrapped around hers, as if afraid she might disappear if he let go. That moment, his tears, his gratitude, was real. No secret, no lie could erase the truth of it. And yet, the words of her grandson still echoed like a bell she couldn't unhear. "He's not even your real son." It was as if two worlds now lived inside her. One was the world she had built, full of scraped knees, school recitals, whispered prayers when the fevers ran too high. The other was the world that had existed without her consent, a hidden story written before she even had the chance to turn the page. She had been a character in a play where the script was already decided, her role assigned without her knowing. That betrayal cut deep, and yet, when she looked at her son, she knew. Scripts could be rewritten. Family wasn't just what was handed to you. It was what you chose to hold on to. In the days that followed, the hospital became their battlefield of silence. The daughter-in-law sat by her husband's bed, fiercely protective, glaring at anyone who dared to interrupt. The grandson kept his distance, his guilt carried like a stone in his pocket, heavy and unrelenting. The husband, her husband, was gone, but his shadow lingered in every conversation. She found herself speaking to him in her mind, asking why he had done it, why he had thought she wasn't strong enough to know the truth. There was no answer, only the hollow ache of silence. She walked the corridors when she could, her recovery slow but steady, and she noticed other families. A father sleeping in a chair, a mother clutching a child's toy, an elderly couple holding hands despite IV lines tangling between them. Each one was living a story stitched together with sacrifice, grief, and love. And she wondered if, in the end, the details mattered as much as the choice to stay. One morning, her grandson finally found the courage to sit beside her. His eyes were red, not from lack of sleep, but from carrying too much truth on shoulders too young. "I thought I ruined everything," he whispered. "I thought if I told you, you'd hate him. Or maybe you'd hate me." She reached for his hand, her grip still weak but her voice steady. "You gave me the gift of truth," she said. "It doesn't break us. Lies break us. The truth. It hurts, but it sets us free." His tears fell fast then, and for the first time, she saw relief flicker in his expression. When her son was strong enough to walk again, they went outside together. The garden was quiet, the air cool against their skin, and the smell of soil and grass felt like a balm after weeks of antiseptic air. She watched as her grandson brought out the young tree they had chosen together. Its roots were fragile, its trunk thin, but it was alive, ready to dig deep and grow. Together they pressed it into the ground, her hands guiding his. Dirt clung to her fingers, earthy and grounding, and as they patted the soil firm, she felt something inside her settle too. At dinner, weeks later, the family sat together, though the fractures remained visible in every glance, every pause in conversation. The daughter-in-law spoke little, her bitterness not yet softened. The grandson was quieter too, though his silence carried less shame now and more thoughtfulness. Her son, still fragile but healing, looked at her often, his eyes saying what his voice sometimes couldn't. "Thank you. Thank you. Thank you." She raised her glass of water and looked at them all, not as a broken family, but as one stripped bare of illusions. "Truth didn't break us," she said. "It stripped us bare. Now, we can build again." Her words didn't erase the years of secrecy. They didn't fix the inheritance disputes or heal the bitterness between in-laws, but they planted something new, the way a seed disappears into the soil before it becomes visible as growth. She understood now that rebuilding wasn't about pretending the past never happened. It was about deciding what to carry forward. At night, when the house was quiet again, she thought of the tree outside. Roots didn't ask where they came from. They simply grew deeper into the earth, reaching for stability. Branches didn't apologize for stretching toward the light. They just did. That tree would stand long after her, long after this chapter of betrayal and healing was closed. And every time her grandson walked past it, he would know they planted it together. In that thought, she found peace. Bloodlines may twist, truths may burn, but love chosen, love lived, love given freely, was the only inheritance that mattered. And she had given it, fully and without regret.